Hi everyone. I am Lance Eaton. I am Senior Associate Director of AI and Teaching and Learning at Northeastern University, and I've been doing a lot of things around AI, teaching, learning, and trying to figure it out like all of us are. So I hope the what I share today is helpful and kind of, again, part of this ongoing rich conversation that so many of us have different parts of. So I'm going to share my screen, right? And give me a second to make sure I can see the chat. Uh, I caught the tail end of the last talk, and I'm reasonably intimidated. Like that was a really robust set of work, and so uh, I don't know if I will live up to that, but I hope to still spark some really interesting considerations and conversations today. So I'm going to put into the chat the resource document that goes along with this slide deck, which will give you access to the slides. There's a prompt library, bunch of resources, and it's all covered with Creative Commons license for people that want to borrow and adapt. But here I am. I am here talking about advancing our understanding and theirs, finding effective uses of generative AI in teaching and learning. And how I like to start off lots of these conversations, because we have so many feels about generative AI, is just to get a sense from folks. What is generative AI, but wrong answers only. So I'd love to hear from you answering this question. What is generative AI, but just wrong answers? Big brother watching from Patricia. Know it all from Jarek. An answer machine. Human-like intelligence. A little man in a box. A tool for students to cheat. I love that, Lisa. A resource from Tammy. The end of the human race as we know it. Yes. Thank you, Yvonne. Helper. Shakespeare. Protest too much, Robin. Any others? A solution to all our problems, isn't it though? The teacher's replacement. That's right, Giselle. Interaction partner. These are great. No creativity by humans from Andy. Any more? A lazy person's cop out. Ooh, Josh is Josh is spilling some tea. All right. Any more? I'm just slightly disappointed that nobody said Terminator. We did get like the end of the world as we know it, but usually somebody will say Skynet or the Terminator. But here we are. So I did the John Connor tried to tell us. Thank you for that. So I did the quintessential thing, which is, of course, I asked ChatGPT, what is generative AI, but wrong answers only. And it gave me this response of generative AI is a magical creature that lives inside your computer and makes all your dreams come true. It spends its days knitting digital sweaters and baking cookies for other programs. In its spare time, it enjoys composing symphonies for squirrels and painting abstract portraits of invisible friends. The primary function of generative AI is to serve as a professional and online fortune teller, predicting whether you'll have spaghetti or tacos for dinner based on the alignment of your browser history. Now, I do feel like that last sentence feels a little bit too on the nose. I do feel like it actually probably does do that, or if you put that in, it might actually have some interesting things to say. Um, but I like to start off the conversation like that because I also frame my next three slides of like how to disappoint and alienate your audience in three slides or less. And I start that by just talking about like I don't want to bury the lead that generative AI in its appearance represents a lot of different changes in how we think about teaching and learning. You know, there's no magic bullet. There's no one simple solution to figuring out the assessment challenge within all of this, to figuring out the real concerns about cheating and also the inflated concerns about cheating. There's no magic bullet for figuring, you know, to figure out like how much this hits all of us and feels like it's a just as we were getting our legs steady, the rug was pulled out from under us. But I do think conversations in rooms like these are incredibly important for us to figure it out. Uh, I am never a fan of building mouse. I have been a fan of building mousetraps, and all that got me was building more resentment towards my students and more antagonism from them. And so, a lot of what I talk about today is about how to work with it, how to think about it as a thing that exists, and find ways of encouraging thoughtful, critical use. But I that idea of pursuing how do we catch them, I think is a I don't think it's the right question, or I think it's a question that comes so later on, that we need to build and think about different ways of how we navigate it. And then finally, like, been a lot, and I say this of not just AI, uh, but like the world at large, um, higher education, right? That there's just been so much going on at the national level. And much of it has been going on for more than the last 5 months, but like there's a lot. There's things feel incredibly unstable. And thinking about AI in isolation, uh, AI's emergence in isolation, not talking about in the context of the emergence of or the other side of the COVID-19 pandemic, and returning to whatever we thought was normal. Uh, like those things have to be acknowledged, and how all of this is incredibly complicated. Um, that it has not, it was not and has not been easy, and that many educators are who deeply, deeply care about their practice are also incredibly paralyzed, by the idea that everything that they did previously, or much of it, uh, is they have to reinvent it and reinvent it so quickly after having done so for the pandemic. Uh, in fact, um, I have a, oops, somebody says they don't, I'm sorry, I'm gonna just quickly pause right now because people don't have access to the document. I made that silly mistake. Total rookie mistake. I apologize. All right. Let me return to full screen. Thank you for letting me know. Um, there we go. Thank you. Sorry about that. As I was saying, I have a friend who has been teaching for 20 years. She's phenomenal, thoughtful, deeply caring educator. And he has been doing the things that we have been asking educators to do for years now. When we're talking about assessment and instructional design and faculty development of, she has her course, and she's been thinking about that, make sure I have really good outcomes, measurable outcomes, outcomes that are like solid and don't have words like understand in them, right? And then has been finding really thoughtful key assessments to align with those. And then the learning materials that like support how to get prepared for those assessments. And like generative AI just came in like a wrecking ball and just like blew it apart, because in building that deep, intricate web, AI only has to disrupt one of those things before it disrupts all of those things, right? That's how that web, that's how that design, that alignment works. And so, she rightfully so was like, for the first year or more, just like, I just can't make my way past this. Like I am so spent on working so hard and having this new tool that, yes, it has lots of possibilities and considerations. Um, it also like changes everything that we've been working towards, and like I have to rethink everything yet again. So I always like to start with that. I think if we don't recognize that, not just people we like who may have strong critiques, rightfully so, of technology in teaching and learning, particularly generative AI, not just folks who just do not, for whatever reason in their career, feel like at this point it's worth their time learning about this technology, and also folk like this who do want to, and also it is a overwhelming amount of challenge that they are trying to put together. So that always brings me to Douglas Adams. He is one of my favorite authors, and this is one of my favorite quotes from him, which is, anything that is in the world when you're born is normal and ordinary and just a natural part of the way the world works. anything that's invented between when you're 15 and 35 is new and exciting, revolutionary, and you can probably get a career in it. And three, anything invented after you're 35 is just against the natural order of things. And it's a grounding quote, and I appreciate it because, I am 10 years past that 35 threshold, uh, and don't find AI against the natural order of things. I somehow have found myself in number two, where I do have a career in AI, at least in AI and teaching and learning, but I'm not like, I still don't consider myself like, I don't know that I consider it revolutionary, and I don't know that I consider it exciting. It is new and it is complex. I have 35 different feelings about it, and that was just between coffee this morning and this session today. Um, but I think we have to me, this helps me continue to think about how do we reconcile the challenge that this presents and how do we reconcile it, realizing that different people are having different experiences with it in their relation to it and to how it is normal or how quickly it has become normal, the world that they live in, versus it feels completely new. And I think this is where I lean a lot into recognizing one of the big challenges with all of this is like it's not AI itself is a technology. And that, but the challenge it's like one thing that we are responding to, but what we're responding to is that it's the things that it challenges about are actually perennial problems we've had with most technologies, like the same issues, the same challenges, the same concerns about how we're going to get students to learn and how do we effectively understand and make sense and evaluate that. Those are the same questions we had when Wikipedia came out. They're the same questions we had when the internet came out. And I can share a bunch of research that shows that. And so there is this interesting tension that we're trying to figure our way out. Um, and the challenge that AI presents is that it happened all at once, right? Wikipedia and smartphones, laptops, the internet, these all took years to show up, but AI was here in under a year. And so it can feel really overwhelming, it can feel really challenging. And also, like, I have hope. Um, I have I have some excitement, not about AI, but about faculty and educational developers and like entire institutions in how we're figuring this out, right? To me, I have hope because I can look at something like this and be like, oh yeah, like we've been here, we've done this. Uh, these are the educational technologies of our lifetime, right? These are all of the ones that have like come out and been largely adopted. And so I'm just going to walk you through some of those, starting as far back as the 70s. The desktop computer, Scantron, slide projector, the typewriter, up through into the 90s, and we get digital databases, we get the laptop computer. Into the 2000s, we start to get blogs, we get citation management tools, and more into the 2000s, interactive external hard drives, interactive simulations, smart boards. That's what I was looking for. Learning management systems, we move into augmented reality, digital collaborative annotation tools, right? All of these tools have slowly and in different ways made made it into our learning, made it into our classroom. And they all represent struggles. They all represent challenges, but they also are things we've figured out. And so I keep coming back to, for lots of different reasons, that like we have playbooks for this. We know we figured our ways through lots of these different technologies. And like I said, it's all now happening what we feel like is in one moment. But like we we've been here before in lots of different ways. So to me, that's why we have hope, is that uh, this is a quote that comes from both Peter Pan and Battlestar Galactica, which I think conceptually represent a lot of my where like I do a lot of my fiction reading. Uh, and that is, all of this has happened before and all of it will happen again. And I know that feels like it can feel very light, it can feel very dismissive, or it can feel as we're figuring this out, like, well, that's great, but like I need like hard thing, like tangible things to figure out. And that's where we're gonna move into now. But so much of what I've done and seen in higher education in my 20 years is like us figuring it out. And I think this is the first time in my career that like I have there's something really interesting to be very conscious that this is going to have a bigger effect than many of those technologies, and that we're aware of it, and that we can actually like we get to play a part in it. We get to really think through how we do this, and no matter what, like no matter what happens with generative AI, it could fall flat on its face, or this could be the best we get of generative AI, which, if we're being honest, is kind of meh, right? It's kind of mediocre. Like it does a lot of things okay, and a lot of things it does badly, and a lot of things it's like, oh, great, now I have a recipe so I can go cook my dinner, right? Even if this is the best that we get with AI, it is pushing us to be better educators. It is it is challenging our assumptions about how we do assessment, about what we are looking for, about how we document how learning, how we demonstrate learning. And I think that's a really powerful aspect of what it gives us is it gives us a real challenge to push ourselves to say, maybe it doesn't have to all be papers or tests, and maybe there are more tangible or interesting ways. So, well, this slide didn't exactly work the way I wanted it to, but let's go with it. One of the things that we're doing right now is we're navigating four different challenges, four different knowledge domains that we're trying to figure out all at once. And so the first knowledge domain is just disciplinary knowledge, that of ourselves in classrooms of like, what is our subject matter expertise that we bring into that space, but also our students and how do they develop disciplinary knowledge? Because the only way to use AI well, like the kind of well that, we can all get behind, is if you have disciplinary knowledge. That's the only way you can call BS on what AI puts out. But we also, again, faculty and students and everybody in the institution needs AI knowledge. We need to understand to some degree what these tools do and how they work. This doesn't mean we all have to be AI experts, just like we don't have to be internet experts. But we have to have some semblance of understanding how the internet works, how our phone, like, you have to understand what it can do, what it can't do, and like the limitations and the possibilities. So right off the bat, like these are things that like we need to be figuring out. But then there's a third knowledge, which is AI in the discipline. And this is that question of how is AI showing up, being used in the discipline? And the thing is, we can use the internet as a great example. There's no discipline right now. There's no discipline, industry, etc., that has not been changed by the internet. They all have some level of their practice, how they access information, how they connect, how like so much of it is the internet is embedded in all disciplines at this point. So much so that like if you were to try to do your class tomorrow, almost universally you wouldn't be able to if there was no internet, right? Because how would you be in contact with students, especially if it's an online class, right? How would you be able to tell your students to do research? Because most of it is going to be in databases. It's not going to be at their physical library, right? How are they going to submit assignments? How are they getting them to you, right? Like there's all of these things, these practices, these expectations that we now are part and parcel. And we're going to see that happen with AI. It's going to show up, and it already has in different disciplines. It's in the medical fields. It's certainly in, business. It's in a variety of disciplines, showing up in showing up and being used in different ways in law and so many other fields. So how is it showing up in the discipline? How is it being used? And the thing is, as an educator, you've got to take all three of those, and then you've got to think about what the implications for pedagogy is, right? It's how do I teach about AI in general, but also how do I teach about the AI that's being used in my field? And then given the way AI is being used in my field, what are things I'm no longer teaching? And that's going to be that's the crux and the challenge is what are the things we don't hold on to, right? Like when we move from the card catalog to the database, we gave up certain skills in order to use other skills. And that's the conversation we're going to be in for a while. But I don't think we've all realized like this is the balancing act. We really have to put like these are the filters, these are the things we have to keep in mind as we construct that learning space and as we think about teaching and learning. So what about AI assignments, right? What can these look like? What can it mean to be in a world with generative AI and really think with students about what assessment can do, how you can do assessment, how you can do assessment well. I'm not going to say AI proof because I don't think that's a there's very few versions of AI. Actually, there's no versions of AI proof that I've encountered that don't include alienating certain students that are either ableist in nature or are uh, a level of surveillance that is probably even more than what people may get in prisons. So how do we think about these as ubiquitous tools and what they can be, how you can use them in teaching and learning in effective ways that at least address some of that tension that we're talking about of like how do we make sure they're not bypassing the things that they need to learn? So, I mean, one of my favorites is red teaming. It is this idea of creating AI content. This could be the instructor is sharing content, students are creating content either for themselves or for one another, or they're looking at exploring contents out in the wild that is AI generated. And the idea is to pick it apart. The idea is to really scrutinize it and make sure that it has been um, what is true, what isn't, why do we know that it's AI, what tells us, like really do a deep dive, right? And in this, you're starting to learn what are those AI patterns because we see them. People will talk about the sniff test. People will talk about like, man, this is giving AI vibes, right? Well, how do we start to build that AI pattern recognition? It also builds out the conversation about discernment of where AI should and shouldn't go in work, in learning, and things like that. And then it's building those critical thinking skills, right? And so much of this for me is the like a really rich opportunity have have students really understand and play with and learn about its limitations. And so sometimes it is the instructor starting with like their own takedown of something, their own critique or how they are seeing where it's falling short. And other times it's, students doing it with other students' work. In other words, the challenge is like to try to create something with AI that you think is foolable by another person and then have that person take it down. And the thing is, you do this around the content in the course. And so there's a continual back and forth of like not just learning about the AI, but learning about the content, the whatever the focus is of the course, and demonstrating those critical thinking skills, demonstrating the ability to articulate arguments, lots of different things that you can build into something like that. Here's another one that I think is really, it's a good reflective practice. It's a good practice where you're getting students to really think in two lanes, both of like what is their own and what is AI, and then where do they come together and why. So in this one, it is this idea of like students are actually, you're having them create something on their own, and then they're actually going to try to enhance it with AI. And like, one of the challenges with that is like, again, these aren't AI proof, but having them create it in some context. And that can be as simple as like, in the classroom, having them start to build it and start to put, their ideas together or taking it from somebody else and then enhancing it, but really having them lean into like, how do they make decisions about what is better and why? This works better certainly around things that are closer to the self. And this is another piece we have to think about is how to continue to make assignments more relevant to students rather than uh, relevant to the students while still meeting the course objectives and outcomes, right? So finding that balance line, because the more stake they have in it, the less likelihood they are going to misuse it. Not always, but that's what we certainly see. One of my favorites, and this can really be done in almost any class space, is a gallery walk. So this can be done with anything from code to business plans uh, to creative work, where you are talking through, or you're creating a video or what have you that is articulating your choices and why. Why is it set up like this? Why did I choose this? And being able to really dig into what is the benefit of your choices. That again requires a lot of uh, intention and awareness and sense making of the discipline, to not just be able to talk about it in general, but talk about your choices, talk about why one thing is better, like that comparing and contrasting, that elevating what you think is important versus what you don't think is important. This is probably one of the more robust examples that I'm seeing a lot of folks use. And this is having the AI act as a simulator. And there's lots of different ways you can do this, right? You can have the AI act as a simulator for and to pretend to be a client, a customer, a patient, or have them act as the specialist. So they could be um, they could be the lawyer, they could be the manager, but really creating a scenario using AI to create a scenario where the student actually has to like engage back and forth. And part of it, and I think this is another thing we're to be thinking about, is like part of this is going to change what submissions are. In some of the courses I've been teaching, like I'm not asking for the document. I'm asking for the chat log, right? I'm wanting to see how they engage with it and learn about their thinking that way. And this is again something that I think is going to be continue to be important in this, is the engagement, the back and forth dialogue is actually like learning about how the students are learning and making sense of and interacting, is them demonstrating their knowledge. So there's lots of opportunities, lots of ways you could do this. One of my favorites that I had just learned of recently that somebody was doing is, so the students do that interaction. So maybe the person is sorry, the simulator is a lawyer. It's a law class. The student has that interaction, goes back and takes that dialogue and does export it into a document and then codes it for good answers, mediocre answers, amazing answers, answers that just don't make sense, what have you. And then they grade, the student grades the simulator on how well they did as a lawyer, if that were the example, and then justifies that grade, right? And so if we think about that as a process, first of all, they're trying to interact and like make sense of it. Then they're doing the annotation. And of course, like when you move that into another document and you start doing like highlighting text and using comment feature and stuff, it becomes also just harder to like have it do that work. But really trying to go through all of this, give it a grade, and then justify the grade, there's a lot of thinking, there's a lot of analysis, there's a lot of ways you can meet what your course expectations are within that. Engages in the metacognition, absolutely. To Philip's point in the chat. Very similarly, and I've been working on a project with this with another college, is like creating AI as a reflection bot. And to me, this is one of the really, I mean, this is how I'm often using it, where uh, using it to ask questions, I think, is one of its most powerful ways of helping students use it effectively. And so what we know about many students, look, first, we know reflection is really powerful for learning, right? It taps into that metacognition. It is awesome. And it's also a practice. It's something that you may have a lot of practice with it. And so when you're asked to do a reflection, you're like, great, like I'm in there. Like I'm a good reflector. I can reflect for hours, like no problem. Don't gotta tell me twice. And there's others who are much early in their practice. And so it may say something like, share your thoughts about the reading. And the student may just go, I didn't like it. Or write that same sentence like 5 different times and then pass in that reflection. And the challenge about that is like you don't want to ding the student because like they're earlier in their reflecting, but also that feedback process means they're not going to see this until it's really too late. And what an AI reflection bot can do is like be live in that process. So when the student says, I didn't like it, the AI bot can come back and be like, well, what didn't you like about it? Well, I didn't like about this. Well, what was it about that that you found problem? And how does that relate to X, right? So you can structure it. You can give it directions so that is going to engage in that back and forth process and then have the student submit the chat log. Like I'm not going to tell the student, okay, now go put all of that into a document. Like share the chat log with me and like let me see how that evolved, assuming that that's the purpose or like I need to see it. But that to me is one of the really powerful ways of getting students to start to play around with it or start to think about it as a learning tool. And so this is one of those examples. Now, I would probably make this a little bit more robust of a prompt. And again, you can find this prompt and others in the resource documents that I shared at the beginning. I'll just throw them into the chat again. But this is one of those examples of like, yeah, like I would build it out more, but really just that idea of like being able to have a back and forth to talk. I mean, we see this, we know there's concerns about it, but the idea that they may feel more comfortable talking to a non-judgmental bot versus a faculty member who will be incredibly supportive, but the fear of them not being supportive is enough, or the past experience of them not being supportive is enough to push them, push them away. Uh, Another practice within all of this, another approach is to just upgrade the expectations. Like move the field goals. Say, okay, because these tools are here, now this is what I'm expecting. I'm not expecting a generic report book report. Like I am expecting you have taken this knowledge and you have built something that is going to have X impact. I am expecting uh, you to now make a 5 minute video, and it can only be 5 minutes, and it has to explicitly touch upon these things in unique ways. Like you can now enhance or have expectations of enhanced outputs, which I think is also really interesting in this is it's not necessarily lower, but we're going to ask more if these are tools that are available. That we can ask more, but also use constraints so that it's not just more stuff, but there's a much better refinement process that they really do have to make decisions to get it done well because now the expectations are higher. And of course, real world challenges. I'm a huge fan of service learning, in particular digital service learning. It's a thing I've done a lot of working over the years, but really tapping into students' motivations and their like connections with the world and giving them real world challenges of like, okay, in this course, here's the thing we're interested in, and here's the thing we want to solve. We want to solve it for something local, something we want to, connect with a organization, or we want to really just think as a class, like how are we going to impact or change or do something really interesting in this world, like not just do an assignment that just goes nowhere, that dies in that class. I'm also a big fan of open pedagogy. Anytime you have students doing things that have bigger purposes that don't just die in the class, but go on to inform the world, inform future students, like it continues to build a more insightful, thoughtful structure. And I think this is another one where like AI is right for like working with students to do things that solve real world problems. And then finally, for examples here, really playing with and recognizing like the skills and knowledge and discipline and abilities plus AI in the discipline, right? Thinking about what those things are, what AI is, what the discipline is, and really make that the center of the course. And you can do this really simple ways, such as just an ongoing weekly conversation of like, hey, so here's a thing that's going on in the world around AI that's related to our discipline and how we're thinking about it. Like, how does this change what we know, what we do, how we do it? Uh, you can do it at classroom class as laboratory, meaning like each every so often you are like jamming away and testing out and playing around with said AI thing, practice piece of information. You do it as an assignment, given AI's ubiquity. How does this now change the field? How does this now change the practice, right? Having them dig into that. Or, and this is one like I'm kind of hoping to do in the next 6 months to a year, which is like start from ground zero with the students. And that is the course, collectively figuring out, okay, well, if these tools are here, what is it that we need to do and how do we need to do it and how do we do that in this period of time that we have? Um, that one needs a lot of scaffolding, that new one needs a lot of support and insight, but like I do think there's a lot of value there in building with and trusting students and finding that space together. Like what they'll own in that, I think will be really powerful. So just a couple of usage tips that I think to reiterate some of the things that we've seen here and that I think when thinking about all of this, particularly with students, particularly with faculty, is important. Always reminding folks that like to ask AI like what it got wrong. And this is one of those like really simple, easy things that like we don't think about enough, which is if it just gave you an answer, you can ask it what's missing in that answer, what's wrong, and sure enough, it's going to articulate some things that are wrong and missing. It may not catch everything, but it does catch a lot. And then you can start to use that. And again, you can start to learn with it about where it's good and where it's not so good. Mentioned this a few times, and this is, I think, just the value proposition in the learning space is getting AI to using AI to flip the script, to get it to interview us, right? To get it to be something, particularly students, in using that as a way of like demonstrating learning. The idea of being able to type or increasingly use our voice to have dialogue about what we're thinking and how we're making sense of the world, I think is going to be incredibly powerful for learning our disciplines. So much of our learning structures are like what's going on right here, which is I'm spending a lot of time talking at you, and then we'll do a few questions back and forth. But what would be so much more powerful is like a version of me or whoever, like having 64 individual conversations, right? And it doesn't matter, like, it doesn't matter that AI is not great if we're using it to ask us questions, right? What matters is that there's somebody or something that's there to nudge back or reflect back at us what we're saying for us to further deepen our thinking. So this is just an example of that prompt, right? I could ask it to give me a communication plan for my HR team about how we engage staff and faculty across our community college over the spring. And it gave me a pretty generic plan. Or I can say, hey, I'm developing this. I want you to interview me to get a good understanding of what we have, like what we've done, what has worked, what is feasible, given our size of team, manageable timeline, etc. And ask me one question at a time. This is just one of many examples where it's like, oh, it can actually I can use it to help organize and make sense of my own thoughts. And where I think we can lean in with students and faculty and everybody else to get more out of AI is not replacing our workflow, but enhancing it. My go-to favorite thing these days is I have the paid version of ChatGPT. I pull it up on my phone, I turn on the audio, I give it a prompt, something I'm writing, it's something I'm trying to think through. It's a talk that I'm going to give. And I give it this, a prompt. I'm trying to develop my talking points for a keynote I'm giving. Uh, Ask me one question at a time, things about whatever the keynote is about. And I might have other pieces of guidance, but really telling it to just interview me. And so if I'm on a walk, if I'm driving, if I just happen to, be in a space where I do not want to stare at a screen because many of us are in Zoom rooms for hours on end every day. Uh, this now asks me questions. I respond. That can kind of free flow. I don't have to think about perfect sentences and blah, blah, blah. And then when I'm ready, I can go on to the computer and everything that I verbally said is now in text. And I now have the building blocks of that talk. And it is such a different flow and really powerful for me. Like I've been able to do more and feel more confident because my I knew it was capturing my voice and that then I could also edit further and like rearrange the things in the order that I wanted them. So kind of couple final things that like what I frame as considerations as we're thinking about and navigating generative AI in the teaching, learning, and assessment space. Avoidance isn't a strategy. I like to say, abstinence has never been a great strategy. It didn't work for prohibition. It didn't work for the war on drugs. The drugs won. It didn't work for abstinence only sex education. It's not going to work for generative AI. That that means we have to learn about it. We have to play with it. And yes, we have to think about where it shows up in our classes. And the banning or dismissing it outright is not going to do much besides delegitimize ourselves to our students. And that's something that's already obviously happening a lot. And that's not to say it's carte blanche and students can do whatever, but there should be guardrails, there should be guidance, and there should also be a recognition that as a new technology, we're still applying a lot of our old lenses to it, and we're missing at times opportunities or ways it could be really helpful in ways that don't necessarily disrupt learning. But we can have that knee-jerk reaction and be like, no, I don't want AI in my class at all. And I don't think that's going to get the results that people want. People are going to use it. And so I have in my classes and with others encouraged, like, yes, you want to have clear boundaries, but you want to make space for it. You want to find out how you want students to know you want to learn how they're using it. Because some of the best things I've learned, both in how to use it and how to think about it, has been with students, how they're making sense of it. To go back to that Douglas Adams quote, there is something they see about it differently just because of where they are in their lives. That is really powerful and helpful um, for me to learn and then to consider if that's true, if that's possible, then what are some things that I change or what are some things I need to now be aware of? Uh, find your own use case for using generative AI. Now, if you do not like AI, and there's lots of reasons to not like it, if you have concerns, absolutely, like your concerns are valid. I would not say otherwise. And yeah, like you may be a person who's like, I don't want it to exist, period. I don't want anything to do with it. And I do understand that. But my challenge to you is find a use case for generative AI that you find is valuable. Work hard to find the use case. You don't have to keep doing it, but you do have to find one. And you have to find one that you feel like helps you understand how and why it's transformative. A lot of the discourse that I hear is from people who have, again, thoughtful, critical considerations of AI in a sense that there's no good use of it. And I think if we're going to be in this place where it is everywhere, it's in our Zoom rooms, it's in our Google Docs, like if we aren't understanding like how for some people it is truly transformative in lots of different ways. And I have seen this with adults and students that it changes something for them that makes learning, that makes doing completely different. And they're not sacrificing their intelligence. They're intelligent human beings who like they've found something about it that has changed for them in a really good way. So I strongly encourage making sure you have a use case that you feel is really powerful. Just it's only to understand and hold that in your head as you see other people use it, or as you start to think about what it means if you're going to be a space that like heavily tries to block AI from being used. Like if that's where you are, that's great. Just really think about and find that solid use case. And then, to go back to that those series of slides with all of the technologies that we've been figuring out. I think what's most powerful in all of the AI stuff that I've been engaged in, and I've talked at like 50 different institutions over the last 2 years, is just how much power, insight, wisdom there is in these spaces. And I think that's the important thing is like no one person, it should not be on any but one person's shoulders to figure this out, but this is a collective challenge and a collective opportunity for us to learn from one another, for us to build upon one another. So whether that's building small communities of practice, attending things like this, having conversations with colleagues in your departments and divisions and the like, this is where it's really important to build upon and learn with one another because there's so much here uh, there's so much to learn from each other as this tool that is having us rethinking even how we rethinking our teaching and learning, but even how we engage or think and communicate. So we just strongly encourage looking to your communities of practice, your colleagues, your professional organizations, and the like to actually like build upon, learn, help one another figure this out. Because I think with that, we continue to find really powerful, useful cases. So with that, I believe we have some time for questions. Gonna stop the share button so I can see the wonderful people.
Yeah, we most certainly do. Thank you very much. This is very, very insightful and it's great work. There's so yes, I did see some discussion in the chat. Um, if you could go back, if you don't mind, for a moment to this issue of self-efficacy and students
Mm,
taking ownership of their own learning, because
hmm
as you pointed out, it seems like we as faculty we suffer from the same conundrum, right? So same pickle. We are in the same kind of a boat from different perspectives. It's just that it is difficult for us to internalize the concept, right? This is so still so very new. What are the good ways to go? I really like the practice you advocated for of questioning the question, right? In a sense
mm,
that, you ask a question, you get an answer. Okay, what's wrong with that answer, right? This is
mm.
something that we are not used to be doing even with us as human beings. And maybe, who knows, maybe that's the reason, right? I mean, once you have your presentation, I'm going to ask you a question about the presentation, but I'm not going to necessarily ask you, hey, what do you think your shortcomings are, right? Could you
Ah,
please take it from there?
what my shortcomings are? I mean, do you have 3 hours? No, just kidding.
Right, right, that's right.
Um,
That's
no,
right.
so I mean, I do like I do think that to me when I learned that, or like when actually my partner introduced me to that, and one of the things that reiterated for me is just how much, how much, okay, I'm gonna have to break out a few pieces here. Like, I'm gonna talk about AI as like a thinking being, but it's not, and I will get back to that in a second. But how much AI thinks or creates differently, and therefore like, we have to think, we get tricked into thinking of it or experiencing it as a human, right? We perform that anthropomorphizing that we've done with our technology for millennia. And so we're stuck in our own traps of how we think about other people thinking, right? The what is it? The philosophy of mind. And this is something that doesn't think, at least the ways that we understand thinking. And therefore we have to like get out of that mindset and into, well, what are things I can do with it that even though it's producing things that remind me of human outputs, it's producing voice, it's producing words, it's producing, coding and things, like all of these things that we think of as human outputs, like how how do I think outside of that? And that I think is like it's such a hard place to get to, but finding examples like the one that I just said, or just having it, flipping it and telling it to interview us. Um, I think the more we collect of those, the more we can find what are also lateral ways of engaging with AI to do something different, to understand or learn differently or connect dots that we're not going to see. So I feel like that is a really interesting piece of how do we think different. And actually, I'll give an analogy of that. When I am writing online, in particularly because for I've been blogging since 2010, and I've been doing that Substack for about a little more than a year and a half now. When I'm writing something that's for online, whether it's those things or anything else, I think in links, meaning as soon as I'm talking about something, I want to think about what am I going to link to, especially if it's something I've already done. I don't think the same way if as I just submitted this week, like when I was finishing my dissertation, I'm thinking citing, but I'm not, citing is not the same as linking. Like citing is like, how do I prove this? Linking is how do I refer to this? And those are two different things that are, so I think to me, that's the interesting thing is like, how might this change how we are thinking and building and creating? And the only way to do that is that idea of, the more of us that are trying to do it and sharing and trying to learn from one another is where the value comes from. And I'll just say, like, part of why I think I've been more and more interested in encouraging the use of it is when generative AI first came out in December 2020, November 30th, 2022. By January 9th, I was teaching a course, AI in Education, at my previous college, College Unbound. And the purpose of the course was to learn about AI, think about its educational implications, and a um, develop a guidance policy for faculty and students at the institution. And it was through that like talking with students, and these were adult students. They ranged from like 20s up through like 50s. Their parents, they're working in in lots of different medical field, educational field, and so learning with them about how they were making sense of it, how they were using it, and time and again they brought in use cases that were like helping them, but were not hindering their learning. And so that just raised to me like there's lots to be learning there if we not saying there aren't concerns or like we're not going to still have to navigate the students that are going to cheat no matter what, but there's richness there. Um, Joshua, over to you.
Well, let me start by saying that as somebody who's here because of Seymour Papert and Logo, which I don't think was on your list of innovations, maybe it was, I missed it. Um, so the pure constructive nature of your approach towards engaging with AI, resonates with me. However, I think generative AI is a different beast than other kinds of constructivist tools and techniques where you're in control of the process. In the case of generative AI, you are having a dialogue with yourself in a sense, right?
Mhm,
And it's a mirror of what you put into it, and it reflects back to you that what it expects you to want, which is not really a learning process. It's a self reinforcement process or creating your own knowledge bubble. Because of that, you have to take specific approaches towards using it for discovery, which
mm,
is fully possible if you have the right techniques and the right mentality to use it for that purpose. But if you don't, you can easily fall into the traps of outsourcing your reasoning, outsourcing your information,
mm,
outsourcing, in the end, your trust.
mm,
And that's the huge danger. And because there's so much danger involved, I believe, you're on the cusp of saying what needs to be said, which is there needs to be a discipline that understands the cognitive impacts of using AI as an extension of human intelligence. And unless we understand what the pedagogical and andragogical implications are for outsourcing our reasoning and our knowledge, we should be very circumspect in what we do and how we do it. And we should, be careful because, well, I think you kind of mentioned it. You said you think in links. I found that very telling because I recall some 10 years ago, Google did a study that says if you know where to find a piece of information quickly, you won't remember it.
mhm,
And I know for a fact I used to know hundreds, if not thousands, of phone numbers. Now I barely know mine. Uh,
mhm,
so, given that propensity to be lazy, as I sort of said early in this thing, how do we create rules that avoid the downsides while we achieve what you're pointing to, the potential upsides?
mm. Uh, I mean, that's a question. That's a question that does go back to Socrates. who's like, this writing stuff, it's going to make us lazy in our thinking. Um, right. And so like that is a perpetual problem. And, to me, I think there's an interesting thing within that we're not always understanding and appreciating, which is like we continue to live in a more complex and complex and complex society that requires more knowledge of us. But there's a real question then about how much we can hold. And a piece that I've been working on is this like recognition of like part of the reason we got universal elementary education in the 1800s was because we're in the industrial age, and now there's there's the other reasons, but one of it is like the abundance of knowledge that came with mass produced books and like the amount of information that was now expected as of the typical person. We see that same thing happen in the mid 20th century with the emergence of like the electric age. As we come out of World War II, we pretty much have universal education through high school. And again, we live in a much more complex society. It's not just the basics things that we need, but we need another layer of knowledge of like how to navigate in an electrical world, more or less. I would say it's interesting. Here we are again, like another 70-year leap. We have not We're in a world where we haven't acknowledged that in order to navigate well, everybody needs post-secondary education. That doesn't necessarily mean college. It just means like to be 18 in the world, there's still so much more one has to like continue to build and figure out. But we've decided we're not going to have universal education. But like to me, in that, there is this recognition of the complexity of the world, the complexity of our disciplines. Um, the any discipline, there was a point when you could kind of really have a strong sense of most of the discussion, but most disciplines now, like there's so much nuance that like it's all subfields and subfields. So like one thing that I'm getting at is there's a complexity of the world today in which we still haven't recon some things we've been able to fall off, like phone numbers, I think is a good example. But like we haven't questioned what are like how much can we hold versus how much we're expected to know. I think AI is certainly like punching at that. Um, so my answer is maybe slightly avoidant, but it is like to me there's a larger question about like how much can we hold, even though we're expected to hold all of it. Um, and that's a tension AI is here to, I think, slightly expose. And yeah, there's ways it could leave us vulnerable, but there's also ways it might help us find a better answer to that.
Yeah, well, I think we need to have an answer to what is the human capacity, because I don't think we want to give it up. We want to maximize it. If the human capacity is infinite, then we want to go as far as we can. If it is limited, then we want to optimize the limited use of it. And if we can augment that with external intelligences or external capabilities, then we are doing the right thing. But I don't think we have the intellectual discipline in place as a society to solve that question.
Fair.
Oh, not yet, not yet. Right? I mean, I think Lance alluded to this. The AI is this is the worst that we ever get to see it, right? It constantly improves. It's getting only better. So who knows, Joshua? This is very insightful question. Very insightful
Hmm.
comment. So hey, all of it remains to be seen. So I'm just very happy that we can at least have the forum. Well, this is obviously not the only one where those issues are discussed.